Hello,
Hello, Michaela.
how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Awesome, so I just have some questions for you. In your show, Question Everything, you tackle the problem of fake news. I see this as one of the problems in dealing with climate change. The amount of misinformation has confused many people to a significant degree. How do we get people to understand the science so that we can move forward and deal with the problem?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm actually looking into that very question at the moment. So how do we get people to try and understand the science? So one of the things that I've come across is this theory that a lot of people don't just get their information from the mainstream media, but they get a lot of their information from people that they know. So you as a person, your interpersonal relationships with people can sometimes be even more important than what the mainstream media is reporting or what scientists are saying or what organizations are saying, right? So one of the key ways that I think that we can change people's minds is to work very closely within the circles that we already have. So to look at our family, our friends, our acquaintances, our colleagues, fellow students, the people that we have in our circle and think to ourselves, okay, how can I influence them to believe in the science? So you are, as an individual, you, Michaela, are very important in being able to convince your circle, not necessarily of your opinions, but to follow the science and to follow the opinions and the research of scientists. I think that's a really important way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that most people don't tend to bring up. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
So it has been said that the more educated we can make girls around the world, the better off humanity will be when tackling key areas of concern like climate change. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, my thoughts are that girls are the best. And maybe that is a biased opinion. I fundamentally believe in educating young girls because just as a global statistic, girls are much less likely to be educated than their male counterparts. I mean, more and more people are going to school, but if you're just going to compare young girls and young boys, in particular countries, young girls tend to be pulled out of school a lot earlier than young boys. If there's a catastrophe or a disaster, man-made or otherwise, it's often the girls who stop going to school compared to the boys. In a lot of countries, there's things like child marriage where girls get married, when they're 14, 15, 16, 17, and they will have stopped going to school in that time. And so I think that, research has shown that the more educated girls are, the more educated they are as women and the more that they are able to contribute to their own communities. In a lot of countries, there's a thing called microfinance, where in certain countries around the world, it's this principle of lending small amounts of money. But in a lot of situations, microfinance organizations lend these small amounts of money to women rather than to men. And one of the reasons is because when they lend it to women, they find that women spend that money more within the community, right? So there's good reason to educate girls and there's good reason to invest in women. We see a lot of the returns. And, women and girls make up half of the population.
Yeah.
So, the more educated a person is, the more confident they are, the more they're able to advocate for themselves, the more they're able to be part of public life. And of course, being in public life leads to, some of the bigger leads to sort of bigger decision making. So yeah, it's really important that women and girls have a voice.
I agree. I think it is too. Uh,
Great.
the latest IPCC report has said that climate change is happening faster than previously expected. When I heard this, I wasn't surprised, but I did get a little angrier at our country's lackluster response. How do you feel when you hear things like this?
Um, well, I'll tell you what I immediately feel. I feel angry and scared and confused. And then I remember that actually most people in Australia believe in climate change. They believe that human beings are contributing to the warming of the planet, and they want to see action around climate change. Poll after poll after poll will show that people in Australia care about climate change. And it's not just the people, it's businesses. In some instances, believe it or not, there are mining companies who are closing coal mines, who are trying to transition from being, just a mining company to an energy company, who are trying to incorporate renewables. There are, organizations that are no longer investing in coal, superannuation funds that are no longer investing in coal, for example. So there's a lot of movement that's still happening in the country that I think is really surpassing our federal leaders. So yes, there is so much more that can be done at a federal level. But I do have to remind myself actually that there is a lot being done, not because of the federal government, but sometimes in spite of them.
How do you think we can get the federal government on board in making those changes faster? Because obviously we need to, as climate change is becoming a more dire issue.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the first thing is to keep your voices raised, which is partly what you're doing, I think, with a channel like this, is keeping the issue on the agenda. I think that that's really important. The more people that talk about an issue, the more an issue becomes in public awareness, the more people start interacting with an issue, and that could potentially change a person's vote. I think politicians ultimately, well, it depends what kind of politician you are, but they are liable to listening to what their voters think of them. And so if you come from an electorate that has, for example, Tony Abbott's electorate, he wasn't somebody who was flying the flag for climate change, and he ended up getting voted out of Warringah for somebody like Zali Steggall, who was campaigning much, on a much bigger platform, for tackling climate change and global warming. So a lot of it does come down to voters. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be in massive numbers, but if electorate after electorate after electorate can kind of, be swayed, then I think that that's definitely going to make our leaders sit up and take notice.
Definitely. So there are some fantastic female environmental leaders across the globe. Jane Goodall and Greta Thunberg are two that come to mind. However, I can't help but think there should be a great deal more than what there appears to be. Given your background in women's issues, I was wondering if you could shed some light on why this might be. Is it simply because the media isn't spotlighting them?
Partly. I think we're definitely seeing more and more, particularly young women. Like when I think of the climate change movement, yes, Greta is the first one that comes to mind. But then I think of all of the, particularly younger women in Australia that are leading climate marches, that are lobbying politicians, girls such as yourself at your own high school, starting up initiatives like this. It's really being driven by young people, and in particular young girls who feel, and I'm so glad to see it, like very confident and very supported when they go out and they speak publicly. I think, however, there's more that we can do to advocate for young girls, I think. I know I work with an organisation called Plan, and Plan is a sort of an advocacy organisation that does advocate for more participation from young girls in public life and decision making. Because you don't really hear the voices of young girls when it comes to like the design of a street, for example. But yet, young girls are among the most likely to face street harassment. So they're the ones that are experiencing, certain things on the ground, but yet have no say in how it is that space is designed. That's just one example, So I think the more that girls are made to feel confident in voicing their concerns, and the more that they are given a space to voice their concerns, and the more that society makes them believe that you and your opinion and your voice are important, that you matter, that's when we're going to start to see more and more girls come to the forefront. And it is happening, not as quickly as what I would like it to happen, but it's happening.
Yeah. So you've met Barnaby Joyce, and given your background in women's issues, this seems like an interesting decision on your behalf. Why did you do that?
Are you talking about the interview that I did with him a few years ago in Tamworth?
Yeah.
Yes, well, that was a story on housing. So Barnaby Joyce had said that, you know, everyone should, if you can't afford a house in Sydney near the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge, you should move to Tamworth, which is, of course, where his electorate is. So we decided to follow him up on that and head out to Tamworth and see what it was like to, you know, whether it was viable to move from somewhere like Sydney to somewhere like Tamworth. And so that's where that interview happened. It was in a cafe at in his hometown of Tamworth in New England. And we decided to do it because it was a story on housing and on how you can move out of the city. And basically just debunking that idea that everyone is, you know, wants to live next to the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and they can't afford a house. And, you know, they're all just kind of complainers, which, you know, we know is not really the case in Sydney. I think if, you know, I had an interview with Barnaby Joyce now, I think he'd be on a very different subject matter for sure.
Yeah. Malala, I'm not going to say her last name, said, I raise up my voice not so I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. We cannot succeed when half of us are held back. Why is it so important for women across the globe to be treated equally?
Because they're half the population, because they're human beings, because they're people, because they have as much right to determine their future as anybody else, because they are affected by the decisions that are being made for them, but not by them, for all of these reasons. I mean, it's ludicrous to me that even has to be a question, because it's so self-evident that if you are a human being, then you should have the exact same rights as any of your fellow human beings, the same rights, the same responsibilities, the same representation. And we know that that is not the case right around the world.
1000% agree.
Love that.
There are women in many regions of the world who do not enjoy the same lifestyle as you and I, simply because of where they live. What are your thoughts on this, and how do we make people more empathetic to their plight?
I think, I mean, you're absolutely right when you say that there are women around the world who don't enjoy the same, not just lifestyle that we do here in Australia, but the same, as we were talking about before, rights or the same responsibilities or the same representations. What I do know is that there are a lot of women in these countries who are fighting for that right. And those women are absolute legends because they are fighting for those rights under the most heinous, sometimes the most violent, sometimes the scariest of circumstances, and they are still there standing and fighting for what they believe in. I think what we can do best is to identify the women who are fighting against systems in those countries and to support them in their fight as much as possible. We let them lead and we stand behind them. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Are boomers really a significant problem in dealing with climate change? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that there's a lot of boomers who strongly believe in climate change, and they believe that the planet is warming. And, you know, they want to leave a good legacy behind for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. I tend not to get too caught up in the intergenerational war between boomers and millennials. I think you're Gen Z. I don't think, is that right? You're Gen Z. Yeah. You're not beefing with anyone. Don't worry about it. We're the ones that are beefing with the boomers. But, you know, for me, I don't get too caught up in, you know, who did what to who and whose fault is it. I think, again, and this is just by the polling that I keep reading on climate change, is it's true that the younger generations are perhaps more engaged in the topic, but certainly there's no indication that, you know, boomers are flippant about it, or that they don't give a shit, or that they're, ignoring the issue. Or I think that there would be a lot of them that really do care about climate change. So I think rather than thinking about it in terms of generations, I think we think about it in terms of like-mindedness. Where are we at? What do we believe? What do we value? Where do we want to see ourselves? And anyone from any generation can join that cause.
You've said a few times about how, based on the polls and stuff, a majority of people do care for climate change and believe in the science and want action. And I definitely agree with you. But I do wonder, why does the media give so much standing and voice to those that deny climate change? And what is stopping Australia from propelling forward in their actions, because they're ranked last out of 200 countries in their actions on climate change, especially since the IPCC report has said that we need to speed up our actions?
That is such a good question. Why does the media keep giving these people airtime? Okay, I want to share with you I'm going to make sure that I get these stats right, because I was just looking over them today and they kind of just blew my mind. Basically, let me summarize it for you. It's that 1% of users of any social network, right, create 90% of the content. 1% create 90% of the content. What that ends up meaning is that you can have a subject matter that ends up seeming far more inflated than what it is. You can have a point of view that ends up taking up so much more space than what it actually deserves. And I think that that is evident for climate change denial. You see it everywhere. You see people engaging with it. You think it's the same as those that believe that climate change is happening. But actually, you have to remember that it's a very small amount of people that are able to create a very large amount of noise. And this is why I keep coming back to those polls, not just one, but many, many over a period of many years, right? Because they are polling people not in that distorted social media space, but outside of that space. So it gives us a much clearer picture of what is actually going on. I think as time moves on, it's going to be harder and harder and harder for our leaders to deny climate change. It's going to be harder for those last few stragglers clinging on to cling on for much longer, because we know that we're likely to experience things like drought, things like fires, things like floods more often and with more severe consequences. And once we start feeling the effects of that, it's going to be very difficult not to shift strategies.
Yeah. What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self based on what you know now?
That's a good question. I'm very big on people, and I would say to my 18-year-old self, find your people. Find the people in your life who are going to raise you up, and you will in turn be a person in someone else's life that you will help raise up. It's a two-way street. They're going to find you, you're going to find them. Find the people that in your life whose values you share, and work together. Work together, support each other, learn from each other, advocate for each other, create a space where all boats rise with the tide. That's what I would say. Find your people, because they're out there.
That's some great advice. And my last question is for you is, how do you deal with negativity and trolling?
I block hard, I block fast, I block early, and I don't give any reason or any excuse as to why I'm doing that. I behave in a certain way on social media, and I expect, do unto others as you expect them to do unto you, as the Bible tells us. So if I'm doing unto others and I'm not getting the same treatment and respect back, I don't need you in my life. I don't need you in my space. I don't need you in my orbit. I'm not required to listen to every single person's opinion. I don't want to. I don't have to. I don't care to.
Yeah.
Goodbye. That's what I do when dealing with negativity and trolling. And I don't for a second feel that I am obliged to hear out someone who is approaching me in bad faith or with any level of disrespect. It's a zero tolerance policy from me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. It was really awesome getting to chat with you. So thank you.
No worries. Thanks, mate. And keep climate on the agenda. I think you're doing a really great job. It really does start with people like you. It really, really does. You know, one person, two people, three people, 100 people, 1,000, a million. That's how it builds. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I'll see you later.
No worries. Okay. Bye.